Hello and welcome to another episode of the Rev RX podcast, where we discuss how to thrive in faith, family, and health. My name is Chad Potts, and I'm your host. You guys are going to absolutely love our guest this week, Coach Red Wallace. Red's going to tell us about his story from how he became a rapper, an up-and-coming hip-hop artist in the Christian world, opening up for artists such as Colton Dixon, to actually giving all of that up because God called him to something greater. We get to learn a little bit of the faith that took to give up something that he considered his identity, to see what God had in store for him. He trusted that what God had in store was better than what his plans were. We're going to delve deep into what it looks like to really thrive in life. We're going to talk about spirituality, how to build those spiritual muscles. We're going to talk about how to become emotionally aware, which is a little bit of a buzzword these days, but basically learning that it's okay to feel feelings. And especially us men, we need to hear messages like that a lot more often these days. And we're just going to talk about what it looks like to really and truly follow Jesus and become the men and women God created us to be. Red is a passionate human being. He's filled with biblical wisdom. You're going to love his personality. You're going to love what he stands for. And I can't wait for you to meet my good friend, Red Wallace. Thank you so much, Red Wallace, for joining us today, man. What a privilege it is to have you here as a guest on the Rev RX podcast.
Man, I'm happy to be here. It's an honor. It's always an honor and a privilege to be a guest on another podcast.
Yeah, we were talking about that before we hopped on here, and it's a different feeling when you're a podcaster than you get to be a guest. But hey, we're just allowing the Lord to use us however He sees fit, and that's part of it, right?
Come on, that's right. Let's do it. I'm excited.
So, Red, can you walk us through a little bit about your story? I want to hear how you got started in the coaching space and the podcasting space. Help us get to know you a little bit more.
For sure. I will try to condense it down, but I come from a long line of long-winded preachers. But I would say that my journey to start back, when growing up, I always felt creative. I always was drawn to creating something out of nothing, or sometimes creating something new out of something that was already there. Cool. And I found myself being a part of, it's funny, I have photos of me as a kid and I'm like speaking on a stage at a local library, or I'm trying to play drums and performing at various plays in elementary school. So I always felt there was this piece of me that was performing, and I played sports. So I was always involved in sports, and not till later on in life, I realized that I leaned into the unhealthy side of performing and achieving. I identified as that high achiever to the point where it became more so overachieving and trying to earn and perform my way for love and acceptance. And that even came when I was getting into my faith in the beginning. And fast forward, it's about 2008, and I'm a sophomore in high school. And at that point, I really started falling in love with the art of hip hop, the culture of hip hop. And I actually became a rapper in 2008. And my first song, I just used the resources that I had and created a song, and it was absolute trash. I was not good. But for whatever reason, being a part of sports and doing things, I knew that it wasn't always the most talented people that win. It was the hardworking. So from there, I felt like if I committed to something and got really focused into something, I could become great at it. Wow. And for me at that time, it became rap. And I really identified as a rapper. Like that became my identity in a sense, because I put so much of my life and my effort into it. And from 2008 to 2018, that's what I did. Wow. So I did some shows. I opened up for a few people, Colton Dixon, etc. And I wrote probably close to 300 songs in that time frame.
That's incredible.
Not all of them got released, but I did a lot, and I poured myself into it. And then I'll backtrack a little bit. About 2016, I started working for a online ministry editing videos, and the face of the ministry. She was much like an uplifting kind of motivational coach based off of the Bible, which I thought was really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I first really started getting into that world. And it was interesting being surrounded by even bigger dreams and people that went after dreams and casting that vision. That was birthed on the inside of me. And I was still rapping there from 2016 to 2018. And then I felt like there was a shift. I felt like the Lord was asking me to lay down the very thing that I found identity in, which was rap at that time. And I was like, what do you mean, God? I thought you wanted me to be, the next Lecrae, the next Andy Mineo, something like that. That's where my mind was at. And I really leaned into that question that I felt the Lord asking me, do you trust me in this? To lay this down, and what I have for you is greater. It's going to be a combination of all the things that you've been through your journey, you've learned. And I said, why not? And sure, initially it felt like a bit of grief because I found my identity in the doing for so long. And when I went into this journey, 2018 to about early 2020, when we went into the great panini, the great pandemic that we had, I found myself realizing so much of my life was tied to trying to earn love, earn acceptance, earn salvation, even to the point where when it was all stripped away and all that was left was the me behind it all, then I had to really understand who and whose I was. And it was from there that I overcame the burnout. I overcame the striving to the point where it was extremely unhealthy. If I would have continued to live to be the person that was in 2018 in that space of, extreme striving, trying to earn and in my own self manufacture these ambitions, I would have definitely burnt out. Who knows where I would be today if I would have continued down that road. And from that, I learned this idea of, and I've always been in my church circles, always been in the idea of discipling others. You get discipled and you're bringing someone with you. And within that, I found that idea of coaching. And I saw a guy on TikTok and was a part of his group coaching calls and kind of started learning the business side of it. But more so for me, it was always that heart of serving people. And it still is today as I coach people. I really have such a passion to help men see themselves the way that God sees them. And that's kind of where we are now. As far as podcasting, I actually started podcasting in 2018. So right around the same time I quit rap, I actually started podcasting. And that came from my pastor. I was actually heading to the ministry that I worked for, and I was working out at Anytime Fitness and getting a pump in before work. And my pastor, she had sent me this message. It was a link to Lewis Howes' 5-Minute Fridays, and he had this podcast where every Friday he's putting out 5 minutes of motivation. And she was like, I feel like you could do something like this. And for her, it was probably like just like a throwaway thought, but for me, it was something that I really latched onto and I ran with. And here we are, it's 2024, and I've made hundreds of podcast episodes, whether it's solo podcasts that are quick motivations, or they're longer, more in-depth conversations like we're having. And it's definitely not an identity, but it's definitely a part of what I feel like is God's called me to. And it's all going back to, like I mentioned, serving other men, serving other leaders in the capacity of how can we better show up for those that we're called and created to lead. And that's been a big piece for me, because I've seen a lot of people in leadership and in entrepreneur spaces, when we're not careful and we lean into the dark side of the strengths of being a high achiever, then we can let our marriage fall to the wayside, or we can let our kids fall to the wayside. And it's so important to approach it, like you mentioned, holistically. But dude, I'm so excited to be in this conversation today that I don't want to get ahead of myself. But hopefully that kind of gives an intro to me and what I'm about.
Yeah, sure. So I wanted our listeners to hear your incredible story, because that's pretty powerful. There's so much to unpack there. Man, I got chills as you were telling me about it. I've read about it, but it's different to hear from you exactly how God led you and directed you through that process. But
Sure.
I'm reminded, as you were telling that story, I'm reminded of this picture that I've seen on social media. Maybe some of our listeners have seen it. Maybe you have too, of God holding a teddy bear. And it's a little teddy bear, and he's holding it in front of him. He's trying to take it from the little girl. And she's like, but I don't, I love this teddy bear. I want this teddy bear, but he's got a bigger teddy bear behind his back, a giant one, and it's just that idea of trusting that, what God leads us to is better than what we could manufacture on our own. It's that whole concept of giving up the good for the best. And man, you've kudos to you for having the faith to do that, because not a lot of people can say, hey, I gave up everything that I was pouring myself into to follow the Lord in a whole different direction. So I appreciate your faith and appreciate you sharing that, because that builds our faith and shows us that the Lord is faithful for sure.
Definitely. And I love that you mentioned it that way, that you commend the faith, because at the moment it definitely felt much more like a leap of scared courage, I guess you could say. But it's, and I always think that that's such an interesting place, because it takes a lot, like you mentioned, to step into that faith. And I think it's so important for people to realize that it sounds glamorous now because we're years after it, but definitely when you're in it, it looks like a lot of uncertainty. And as I've really studied not only biblical principles in this, I've really studied the psychology behind what our brain is thinking when we're going through these transitional stages. And specifically cognitive behavioral therapy is something I've looked at, and a little bit of neuroplasticity. But within all that, I'm by no means expert in that, but I do have such a yearning to learn more about it, because I feel like it's so important. And something I found out is a lot of times when it comes to fear in our lives, our brain is created to help us survive. Like God's made our brains wonderful. And at the same time, when our brains get really stuck in this survival mode, we tend to see things that aren't really threats as threats.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people get afraid of public speaking, and our brain will associate the fear of public speaking like a saber-toothed tiger.
Sure. Yep.
And thankfully we don't have to fight off a saber-toothed tiger, but it's that idea of a lot of times the things that we're afraid of and the uncertainty that we're afraid of can really paralyze us into procrastinating and not doing it. But I always try to encourage my clients and those that listen and watch my content is, if we can simply reframe it, is because a lot of times we think of the worst that could happen. We're like, what's the worst that will happen? What if you thought, what's the best that could happen?
Yeah, that's powerful. There are so many guys, and you and I are a lot aligned in what we're doing, and so I really appreciate the space you're in. And
for sure,
I'm picking up everything you're putting down, brother. I'm right there with you. But there's a lot of men, in particular, that I work with, and I'm going to generalize this, since there's a lot of people out there
for sure,
that are struggling with that fear, right? So we realize perhaps that we're not where we should be in life. Like we realize, okay, I need to be a better father. I need to be a better husband. I need to be a better wife or spouse, or, whatever that may look like in your life. I need to be a better person. But a lot of times there's that fear of change, right? There's that fear that keeps us stuck exactly where we are, because, hey, at least I know, at least it's predictable. I may not be living my best life, but at least I know what I'm getting. At least it's predictable.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, I think the two big fears that I come across in the men and the people that I help in general is, that fear of the unknown. And a lot of times it can fork into two directions. It's the fear of failure, which everyone's afraid of falling short of what they want to go after, and no one wants to fall on their face, obviously. Sure. But also there's that fear of success. And I think that a lot of people fear success just as much as they do failure. And I think the big key in a lot of this is recognizing the root of where the fear is coming from. Because a lot of times the problem's not the problem, right? As we know,
most of the time.
Yeah, when we turn to things that are almost coping mechanisms, I know there's a lot of men out there that will battle with lust, or whether it's any kind of form of addiction, whether it's alcohol, drugs, or even something as simple as social media, things that we turn to find an escape. And a lot of times what I feel like finds the true freedom from those things is digging into the root cause of where that really came from.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times the fears that we have, for instance, say that the fear of the unknown, the fear of failure, is for some people I've noticed is at some point in their life, someone has told them the lie that they weren't capable to do that, or they weren't. They've stamped a label on them. I always like to use the story of it's little Ben. There was a guy named Ben, and this was when he was back in, I'd say, probably elementary school, and the assignment for the class was to draw a horse. So they're sitting there, they're drawing their horse, and he's just going to town, getting all creative with it. And then they're at little group tables, and the table next, and the person next to him, little Susie, looks over and she's like, Ben, what is this? That's not a horse at all. Who are you? You're not creative. You can't draw. You're not an artist. And it was something as simple, and probably she didn't even mean it to the degree that she meant it. She was just a kid thinking she's being honest. And that little seed that was planted in Ben, he took it the rest of his life up into adulthood, where he's now working at a job that he would not choose, because he thought he settled for the life that he thought he was only capable of living, but when truly he was created for so much more. And if Ben was in my coaching, and I use Ben as a very broad example, but I mean, I see tons of Bens in the work that I do. I'm sure you do too.
Right.
And when we're able to recognize, okay, that lie, that seed that was planted, that weed seed that was planted in your life so long ago, it's time to uproot that. And it's time to replant the seed, the promise, the destiny, the calling that God has placed on your life. And it's a lot of, we hear a lot of things like you need to become the person you want to be. But I feel like a lot of it is the unbecoming. Because a lot of times we're taking off the layers and the lies that we believed all our life. Another short story I love to tell you, I'm sure you might have heard it before, but Michelangelo, the famous sculptor, painter, artist, he created the amazing sculpture of the Bible figure David. And I mean, this thing is amazing. It's immaculate. And someone asked him when he finished, how in the world, Michelangelo, how did you take a huge piece of rock, essentially granite, marble, whatever it may be, this big, huge piece of rock that had no real shape or form to it? How did you turn that into the masterpiece that we see today? And Michelangelo said, it's really simple. I just chiseled away the parts that weren't David. And I feel like the work that, Chad, that me and you do is a lot of that. I feel like we're chiseling away the lies, the false stories, all the things that have been piled on us and piled on our clients all of their life. And we're just simply going in and chiseling away and helping people see themselves the way that God sees them. And dude, yeah. And I could keep going. But.
Yeah. And the truth is we all have that. We have that, call it trash from our past, call it limiting beliefs, whatever label you want to put on that.
Yeah.
But we all have things that keep us from really reaching our potential, right? That's what we're talking about.
Definitely.
Reaching your potential that you were created for. Each of us were created with, a specific purpose. And so I want anybody listening here to understand that you were created for a purpose. You're no accident. God has plans for you. And, in order to see ourselves as God sees us, that sometimes takes some unpacking. And another way of saying that is maybe that reconstruction takes destruction first. We have to get rid of that false identity. We have to take off those lies we've been told and start challenging those and say, is that really true? Is it really true that I'm not creative? Is it really true that I'm not good enough? Is it really true that no one will ever listen to me? And then once we unpack that, we can start to discover, okay, what is that purpose God created me for? And we can really start to step into it. And a lot of what we're talking about here is really, what does it look like to thrive? What does it look like to live the abundant life that Jesus talks about in John 10:10, that he came to give us? I've come so you may have life and have it abundantly. That doesn't describe a lot of lives that I see lived out each and every day. That did not describe the life that I was living for much of my adult life. It was not abundant. It was scarce. It was not thriving. It was surviving. And so really my goal, and I think yours too, is to show people, okay, what does it look like to get past that survival, and really reach your potential and start thriving in life. And man, those stories are, really resonate, and they show us exactly what it is that God's wanting to do with us. Now, when we think about thriving, when we think about living our best life, there's several components to that, right? It's not just, I think a lot of us, when we think about, all right, I'm going to live a healthy life, I'm going to live a thriving life. A lot of us generally go to physical health first, right? We think about, all right, I'm going to get in shape, I'm going to lose weight, whatever that may look like for us. But that's only a part of the puzzle. That's only a piece. You have 5 points, I believe, five areas of life in order for it that we need to really focus on in order for us to really thrive. Can you walk us through those parts just briefly and really kind of show us what that looks like?
Yes. So there are those 5 areas.
Yeah.
And I would love to take credit for these, but definitely one of the leading forefathers of cognitive behavioral therapy was who kind of came up with that. But yeah, it's this idea of there's 5 main areas of our life. Mm-hmm. And of course we have physical beings, and we have that we want to put into, like you mentioned, we want to put a lot of our effort into our physical, our exercise, our health. But even more so than just health from a physical standpoint, there's actually 5 layers to our human experience. And I always like to touch on the first one being spiritual, because, we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And a lot of people kind of feel uncomfortable with that idea of spirituality, because it can be a bit polarizing, but the facts are in. and
right.
Despite what your flesh, your physical body may think, a lot of things are more spiritual than you think. And I think that a lot of times we misinterpret situations in our life, thinking them not to be as significant as they really are, but really realizing that our spirit man is a very, very, very important part of us that we need to understand and develop. And that's obviously going to come with our relationship with God. And then from there, we dip into the volition, and volition just stands for the choices that we make based on our emotions and our spiritual well-being. So you kind of see how they kind of stack on each other, because our volition is that idea of really how we're showing up, and our volitional decisions are our responses to who we believe we are. And I think that that's really important, is that who we believe we are. Because like I mentioned with Ben's story, or other stories that I may mention, is a lot of times we're not a result of who we actually are. We're a result of who we believe we are.
Yeah, well.
And when we really lean into that, that's when we decide, okay, because if you have this belief that you're just average, that you're not a spiritual being, that you don't have purpose and calling, when you go into choices and you go into life, you will experience things and you'll choose to do self-destructive habits. Like, that's a lot of reasons why we see people that will overeat or turn to drugs and alcohol, or fill in the blank vice. They turn to that, and you get to that point because you've somewhere along the way you've decided to believe lesser about yourself. And that's kind of where the volitional thoughts come from. And then we have rational, and rational is, it sounds what it sounds like. Rational is what's going to really help you stay alive if there was any immediate threat. And we touched on that a little bit previously. So yeah, you've got spiritual, you've got volitional, you've got rational, and then the fourth one you have emotional. And I feel like this is a good one to zero in on, especially to our men crowd, because I don't know about you, but a lot of my life I was told that acting like a man meant you don't cry. You
Yep.
know, you gotta man up. You gotta throw some dirt on it. You gotta tape an aspirin to it. And yes, that's true. But I really feel like there's in especially now in society, when I feel like there's been an attack on masculinity.
Yep.
And it's that idea of, I truly believe that as men of faith, we're called to be both tough and tender.
Yeah.
And a great example of that is Jesus. Jesus was the lion and the lamb. And where a lot of people thought he was going to come in as the god of war, he came in on a donkey and really surprised everybody. But he really embodied both and. And I feel like as men, if we really want to thrive in our lives, we must grow in emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a very important one of the 5, because a lot of men, it's easy to go work out. Well, it's not easy to go work out, but as men, it's easy for us to focus on a physical target.
Right.
You know, you've got the physical target. I'm going to go physically, I'm going to go attack this, and I'm going to get better in my health and my fitness. That's easy. And even with the rational, it's very easy to be rationally minded as we're thinking about businesses or taking care of things from a very problem solver point of view. But then when we really think about some of these more subtle things, like you think of the spiritual, you think of the volitional, and you think of the emotional, these are things that I really feel like a lot of us as men, we have to focus on, because when I look at it from relationships, I think of it with my relationship with my wife. A lot of times as a man, I want to solve her problems. And it can be really hard for me to have empathy in a situation, because I see it from a almost a very black and white view of, well, babe, this is the problem. This is how you can fix it. Right. And a lot of times women want to be heard and seen more so than they want to be problem solved. Right. And from experience, I've learned that leaning into emotional intelligence, gaining that self-awareness and social awareness is really crucial. Yep. And I think that's a huge aspect of those 5. But yeah, definitely. I think that the 5 levels of the human experience, spiritual, volitional, rational, emotional, and physical, they're all important. And it's like you mentioned, it's a holistic approach. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of times when one area is winning, the other area can feel so chaotic. Yep. And I think the goal is not balance, but it's a goal to have an awareness of all things and being present of which one needs the most attention at a given time.
Yeah, I love that. So when you look at thriving, when you look at the life that God created us to live, then He didn't create us just to have like awesome physical bodies, but to be completely emotionally unaware, right? And definitely not speaking from experience here, but He didn't create us to have to be problem solvers, but not realize that we're part of a bigger purpose and bigger plan than what we can come up with. Yep. So being able to put all those things together is really what it looks like to thrive and to be healthy in all of life. And so, when I came across that on your podcast, I'm like, hey man, let's chat about that, because I think those Definitely. Are so instrumental in what it looks like. And you kind of paints a picture of what it looks like to be, the people we were created to be. Wanted to hone in on a couple of those real quick and think about, all right, so physical, we kind of get that. We know what that looks like. No, it's not, it's simple, but it's not easy, right? And a lot of these things are tied together, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And then, like you said, the rational, I think sometimes that comes easy to us. Logic, we see things logically a lot of times. So, A plus B equals C, and, they got this formula, and we try to work that out. But when it comes to the spiritual and volitional, so that's kind of the soul aspect, right? Mm-hmm. Soul care. And then when it comes to that emotional intelligence, that kind of hits the mindset. Those are things I think we struggle with. Those are things that I know that I wasn't taught in school. Nobody taught me how to overcome limiting beliefs in my 11th grade year in high school.
For real.
We learned a lot about parallelograms, um, and not a whole lot about how to live life in the way we were created to live. That's not a knock on the educational system. That's just saying, I think these are things that we have to implement later on, and we have to use platforms like this to be able to say, hey, here's what I've learned, here's what I'm teaching, here's really what that looks like.
Definitely.
But thinking about the spiritual side of things, man,
Mm-hmm.
what does it look like for you to really kind of build that side of our health up? What does it look like to be spiritually strong, spiritually healthy? And of course, you and I are Christians, and so we see things through that lens. Realizing that, yeah, you'd mentioned that may be polarizing for some, but we're bringing to the table our thought processes, our beliefs, and as a Christian, how is it that we build that spiritual health? What are some thoughts you have on that?
I think it's, to simplify it, the simple answer is spending time with God.
Yep.
And I know that sounds like such a cliche and such an easy no-brainer. And it's something that has to be a daily practice, because yes, one moment with God, one moment in his presence will change your life.
Sure.
Completely. And we have to almost practice his presence, because it's just like, I think about the relationship with my wife and kids. If I was to never talk to them, how could I ever expect that they would feel like I care about them?
Sure.
If I didn't want to genuinely sit with them, take the time to be with them, how will they even feel connected to me? And I think the same goes with our relationship with Jesus. Is if it's not a daily communion, then we're going to feel out of whack. Because I don't know about you, but I get into my Bible daily. I get into prayer time with Jesus daily. Now, there are seasons when seasons get busier, and I may miss a couple days, but I'll rarely miss more than 4 or 5 days before I'm like, what is going on?
Yep.
And I feel like a lot of times that the missing piece is going back to mastering those basics. And to do a parallel of this, I play drums. I've played drums for my church for a while now, and I've gotten the privilege to teach some of the younger guys in our church how to play. Cool. And it was upon teaching them and going back to the basics myself, I've seen my own drumming improve. And it was, and I feel like, as I've thought about this from a spiritual lens, I think about it so important. I feel like God's really calling us to master those basics and to build that foundation. And there's a business coach that I really like, and he was mentioning how if you view your business like a skyscraper, you see each level that you need to go on as stacking on itself. Now, before you can go to floor 2 or level 2, you need to master the bottom level. Wow. And I feel like that can be applied to all areas, especially our spiritual level of life, because it doesn't have to be as complicated as we want to make it. Because a lot of times, if you're listening and watching and you're fairly new to your faith and you want to build your spiritual muscle, you may think, okay, well, Coach Red and Chad, they said I need to be in the Bible, so I'm going to read a whole book a day, every day. I'm going to do this. I'm going to be in hours of prayer. No. Calm down, settle down. I appreciate the energy and the drive to do that, but I would say don't look at the hour you don't have. Look at the 10, the 15, the 30 minutes you do have. And you could simplify it as there's like the 10-10-10 rule or the 5-5-5 rule. You spend 5 minutes listening to some worship music, 5 minutes in prayer, 5 minutes reading the Bible. It can be that simple. And I think that you kind of start with the little you have and you build upon that. Because when I first started out, I didn't understand anything about the Bible, and honestly, I'm still learning. I think we all are. It's a lifelong process for sure. And I think that you start where you're at and what's in your hand and what you have, and you develop it from there. And then and it also comes with that community piece. Because if you aren't plugged into your local community, your local church, then what are you doing? Because if there's anything that's helped me in all areas, especially my spiritual level, is being first connected to my local church, and then within that, the community of men, because I've built a brotherhood of men around me. I lead a community small group during the week, and it's seeing that and being around that. That's what's going to really start helping you cultivate and develop that spiritual muscle.
Yeah, iron sharpens iron, right?
Yeah.
So being
Exactly.
around other believers really helps us for sure.
For sure.
Yeah, and I love that because you showed us just how doable that is. A lot of times, I'm asking people, all right, well, how's your faith? How's your relationship with God? They're like, well, how can I make that better? How can I improve that? I'm like, all right, well, are you spending time with God every day? And then people usually say one of two things. They say, okay, well, what else can I do?
Exactly.
Like, no, that is it. Like that is the answer. It's not the most, it's not there's not an easy button for building your relationship with God. There's not an easy button for building any relationship in life that matters. You can't text message God and then you're good for the week. It's a lot more than just attending church once a week, twice a week, whatever that may look like for you. For much of my life, that was Christianity. That was following Jesus, was going to church. I'd achieved everything I'd set out in life to achieve, and I was empty on the inside because I didn't have a relationship with my Creator. I was going through the motions. I was following a list of rules. I was trying to be on my best behavior, but that relationship piece was not there. And so, a lot of times we like to gloss over that and say, well, what else can I do? No, that's it. That is the answer. Time every day with God. It's simple. You can start where you are. It's like anything. So, if we're going to start working out, if we're going to start trying to, get ripped, whatever the case may be, and we start going to the gym, the best way to approach that is not to say, all right, I'm going to spend 3 hours in the gym 7 days a week and I'm going to reach my full potential. No, that you're not going to stick with that. When you think about dieting, when you think about improving your nutrition, the best way to do that is not, to eat 500 calories a day. You're going to lose weight, probably. You also might die. It's about sustainability, right? It's about what can you do every day. And so, appreciate the enthusiasm, man. I'm going to read a book of the Bible every day. I'm going to spend 2 hours in His Word. What can you do every day? And then on the good days, add to it, right?
Yep.
I love the 5-5-5 rule. On a good day, you can make it 10-10-10.
Yeah.
I love that. That's absolutely spot on. And then the last thing I wanted to get into is this emotional intelligence. And we could probably spend a whole episode on that, but just quickly.
Oh, yeah.
You're exactly right. We as men, especially our generation, we've grown up with the men don't cry. Men can't have emotion. Men can't have feelings. Suck it up. Deal with it. Whatever the case may be. And that was how I was raised too. No shun on in society or anything like that. No judgment. That's just the reality. And then I think a lot of men today are really wondering, what does it really look like to be a man? Because our society is kind of attacking masculinity at this point. And so I love how you use Jesus as the illustration there. Jesus is the toughest dude you'll ever meet.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he endured crucifixion. He endured the beatings that he did not deserve. And, he could have gotten out of that, but he didn't. He was tough. It was tough. You could say he was tough as nails, right? The toughest guy you'll ever meet. But then he was also tender, right? The shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept.
Yeah.
We see him having appropriate emotions at appropriate times. So, really thriving in this emotional intelligence space. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit about how we can really think of that as, what does it look like to be? And I'm going to hone in on the men at this point. I think women do a better job here than we do.
For sure.
They seem to be more emotionally intelligent than us guys. But what does it look like? We don't go around crying all the time, but then there's a place for being allowed to feel our feelings, right?
Definitely. Yeah, I think the first place starts with the assessment of where you are right now. And there's a great book out there, Emotional Intelligence 2.0. I didn't write it. I would have loved to get credit for it, but unfortunately I can't. But I'll give credit where it's due. And they have an assessment that comes along with the book, and it really breaks down where you're at, where it's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, social management, and you kind of see the starting place. And what I love about the concept of emotional intelligence, it's not like an IQ. With an IQ, they kind of say you are the level that you are and there's no improvement. But even with that, I believe that we have the same spirit that raised Christ from the dead. So I believe that he will also develop our wisdom. And with that, the same goes with emotions and our emotional intelligence, and it will be developed. And again, it goes back to it's going to take work. But as far as bringing it down to the most simplest step, for me and the men that I help, especially those guys in my group, I've started a weekly group with some men in my church, and we call it Let's Talk About It. And the heart of it was really creating that safe place for men to get with other men, to encourage each other, celebrate wins, but also rally around each other when we are going through it.
Yeah.
And the biggest pillar of that is vulnerability. Now, vulnerability, like you mentioned, you're not going to go up to a stranger on the street or go knock on your neighbor's door if you have no idea who they are and just pour out your guts without any real connection. And I would encourage you, find those people, and it doesn't have to be a ton of people. It can be 2 to 5 or even less, one person, and get radically vulnerable with them.
Yeah.
And I love Brene Brown's work. She has a lot of work on vulnerability. And one of the things she says is you'll experience a vulnerability hangover, which essentially the next day you'll think, whoa, did I just share all of this with someone?
Yeah.
But again, if you're sharing that in the right circle and it's not being met with judgment, and even sometimes it's not even being met with the solution,
right?
But the space is being held. That's where you're really going to find growth in that emotional intelligence. And to take it a step further is a lot of times, especially going back to men being problem solvers and wanting to solve things, a lot of times we're looking for an answer, but really what we need is a better question. And if we can ask ourselves the right questions and ask those that we're connected to the right questions, you'll be amazed to see what happens. So again, another great question, and I'll try to wrap it up with this one, is within this community group, I have a men that are Let's Talk About It group. We have various semesters because we like to take breaks in between, so we're not just bogging down our lives. But usually each semester at some point, because some guys will come in, some guys will go just because life happens, is I like to open with the question, what do you want us to not know about you? Now, obviously, don't go telling a stranger this, but finding that circle and then asking that question to both yourself and those that you feel safe enough to answer with, what do I not want you to know about me? And you'll be so surprised what happens when you create a space for that to be answered.
Right.
And it's such a beautiful moment. And again, men hanging out with men, you don't really hear that much. What a beautiful moment we had together.
Yeah.
It can sound kind of weird, but I mean it with the most sincerity. It's amazing to see when we begin to put ourselves out there emotionally, we find out that we're not alone. Because if there's something I've noticed with my group is one group might share, a deep, dark struggle that he's going through. And instead of saying, what the heck, man, you're a Christian, you should be better than this, you should be polished, why are you not perfect? Instead of saying that in that moment, you're met with the grace of God, but you're met with the connection to the rest of humanity that 5 other guys have probably experienced the same exact thing you're going through. And it's out of that I feel like that's when we truly see life change. Because when we feel, cause the enemy loves to come in and in our own minds when we're thinking about those negative thoughts or the negative situations we're going through, he'll twist it and be like, you're the only person that experiences that.
Makes us feel isolated.
You should feel shame. You should feel guilt around this thing. And so we just, we isolate. But it's amazing what happens the moment you put that in the light.
Sure.
And I love that idea. Again, going back to Brene Brown's work, is she calls it the shame gremlins. And what better thought to picture the gremlins? Now, that's probably dating me and you. If you don't know what the gremlins are, Google it. It was like a Furby. It was like this weird little creature, and they were disgusting and they were wreaking havoc. But but what stopped them and where they lost their power was when they were brought into the light. Oh, that'll preach in itself. That gets me fired up, because how much more so when we bring into the light and we share those deep, dark struggles that we have, that it loses its power.
Wow.
And I feel like that's why there's such an attack on emotional intelligence for men, because as men, I truly believe that we're called to lead our households, to lead our communities. And it's frustrating. And I understand when we see great leaders fall. I feel like there should be grace there. And I feel like that should be an encouragement to us to surround ourselves with the help so we don't get into the same situation.
Right.
And I feel like it's really easy, especially in church circles, for us to be really good at the church thing. Like you mentioned, it's really easy to speak the language, talk all the Christianese, say, hey, I'm blessed and highly favored, brother. Nothing going on with me. When in the inside, we're dying.
Yeah.
And I truly feel like there's a shift happening. And Jesus is the Prince of Peace. And he wants us to attain that peace.
Yeah.
And I mentioned it in a recent video, and I'll try to land the plane here, because a lot of times, and we see a lot of people just falling away from their faith or whatever it may be. And I feel like that they've gotten really good at playing church. They've gotten really good at going after the things and looking for the systems. But again, it goes back to what you said. The greatest system you can have, and the secret to your success and winning in life, is literally just getting closer to God, which is going to come from a daily walk with him.
Yep.
And out of that, and when you ask him for more peace, when you ask him for more emotional intelligence, he's a good God. He's a good dad that wants to give greater gifts than we could ever give. He's going to give you those opportunities to develop that.
Sure. Yeah. Peace is what we're after. When it boils down to it, we want peace. We want peace in all of our life. We want peace in our hearts. We want peace in our soul. And I love how you pulled all that together, because here's the thing, guys, if you want to experience peace in your life, if you want to really feel what it's like to be at the very center of God's will, if you want to have that feeling of, man, I'm thriving and I'm not just surviving anymore, it starts with a daily walk with God.
Come on.
And from there, he gives us opportunities to improve ourselves. He gives us wisdom to show us that, hey, we're not in this alone. He gave us other people that we are supposed to talk to, we are supposed to share with. You don't have to walk this alone. You don't have to hold everything inside. And maybe that's my take home at this point, is you don't have to hold it inside. It's okay for you to feel those feelings. It's okay for you to talk to other people about those, because the more we hold it inside, the more that we're going to feel isolated. And I've experienced the same exact thing. One person says, hey, I'm struggling with this, and the whole room lights up and like, oh, I thought I was alone. I thought I was the only one that dealt with that. When in reality, we're all dealing with common issues, but the enemy wants to keep us alone. So, man, love it. We need to do this again, Coach Red.
Yeah, we do. We need a part 2 for sure.
We do. Well, thank you, brother. You are an inspiration. I appreciate the space you're in. I appreciate the work you're doing. Where can my listeners find you? How can they enter into your world and figure out more about what you're doing and the space that you're in?
For sure. Well, if they want to find a plethora of free content I have out there, I too have a podcast. The best place, and where I'm trying to drive most of the podcast guests, are to the YouTube channel, and it's the Better Than the Best Academy, Red Wallace. You should be easy to find. It should be one of the first ones. You're going to see my smiling mug pop up. And that's a great place to start, I think. And then if you want to really connect, which I really want to connect with you like-minded people out there, and you that feel like you could benefit from what we have to offer here, is you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Coach.Red Wallace. I don't know if you'll see that at the bottom. I try to make it easy to put that at the bottom of the video for today. And then, just reach out to me. Send me a DM. I'm always in my DMs wanting to have conversations and to build that connection with those that are searching for me. I'm not too hard to find. But again, yes, Chad, I love what you're doing with this space. I think it's valuable. It's needed. And I want to encourage you in that. Keep on doing that, because I talked to another Christian men's coach the other day, and it's encouraging.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but there's such a unique perspective that each one of us brings.
Right.
And that's why I think it's so important for us to encourage and edify the body and bring us up, because it's really going to be a group effort here. But again, Chad, I appreciate you for having me, and I look forward to meeting all the wonderful people that hear and watch this episode.
Awesome, brother. Appreciate your time. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate what you stand for. And man, just what a conversation this has been. Thanks, my friend.
You're welcome. Peace.
Thank you for listening to the Rev RX podcast. We hope you enjoyed what you heard today, and if so, we'd love it if you would hit that subscribe button so that you'll never miss a new episode from us. Also, feel free to leave us reviews and comments, as we'd love to hear from you. Be blessed and be the very best you.